I think I scratched these glasses even more than before. So I already talked about the prologue and chapter 1 in different videos. So this is going to be just talking about chapter 2. I really didn't expect it to take 3 videos to talk about all this, but here we are. And it's not like I talk about every tiny thing in this book either. There's just too much to actively talk about at all, but yet it still took 3 videos to get here. I took a break from this book when my grandparents visited, so I'm fully prepared to be unprepared for this man's bullshit. So who is this man? His name is John Cooper, and he is the singer of the Christian band Skillet. He is racist, he's anti-LGBT, and I'm going to be honest, misogynistic, but that one is kind of deeper than the other ones. The other ones are very surface level, he doesn't hide it. So who am I and why am I talking about this? Well, I grew up in a Christian household, and I like breaking down arguments that people like John Cooper makes. Okay, now to chapter 2 of the book, Wimpy, Weak, and Woke. Starting off strong with the quote, "My friend Rob has disagreed with my public positions on racial justice." Then instantly adds, "I am a vocal opponent to critical race theory." Am I allowed to quit already? Am I allowed to quit this early on? Cooper goes on to summarize a conversation between him and a friend completely and totally accurately. I mean, I believe that he spoke like this in casual conversation, despite it being more thought through than most of this fucking book so far. I know that we don't agree on some things, but at the lowest common denominator, I think that we want the same thing. I want to talk about solutions for our society that can produce better results and outcomes for minority communities. Help me understand what we can do to help make Black lives better. Cooper then brings up and disagrees with this quote. Because there is nothing inferior or superior about any racial group, inequalities in our society must be the result of racist policies that are being supported by racist power structures and institutions or racist policymakers. John, I'm going to warn you here, you're kind of sounding like you're leaning a little white supremacy by disagreeing with this. But don't worry, he clears it all up by getting completely off topic. Yes, I believe that racism and past discrimination have major effects on the economic life of the Black community today, but I also think that fatherlessness plays a role. So he decides to focus on money instead of the broader topic at large, but he does say that racism plays a factor in how much money the Black community has, but for some reason brings in fatherlessness out of completely nowhere. Like, where did that come from, besides him being racist? I care deeply about the issue of racism, and I am passionate to help marginalized people thrive. But how does he want to help? I believe that there are biblical solutions that can help all people thrive and flourish. He doesn't mention where in the Bible he's talking about, he doesn't mention what actions he wants to take, and his whole plan is just vaguely the Bible. There's nothing more to it. Which is funny because then he goes and says this. I have asked dozens of people what we can do to improve the lives of minorities. I have never received a single viable answer. I have read a quarter of this book, and John never once at all gives an actual plan. There's 100% word for word conversation, turns to the topic of white privilege. However, John Cooper doesn't seem to understand what white privilege actually is, because he argues that rich Black families have more privilege than white poor families, which doesn't match what the definition of white privilege actually is. White privilege is the societal privilege that benefits white people in some societies, relative to non-white people under the same social, political, and economic circumstances. Will Smith's children are not under the same circumstances as those who are born without rich, notable parents. It's actually really funny that John brings up Will Smith because I vividly remember an interview with him where he talks about how when he first started to make money, he bought a car and then the cops pulled him over because the car looked too fancy for him as a Black man and assumed he stole it. Which would not have happened if he was rich. And he talked about how that didn't happen to all of the other people in his neighborhood, all of the other white people who have cars even more expensive than the one he had. It was solely because he was Black. I also want to tell a story about how I experienced white privilege within my own church. It's not the most extreme example, but I really think it ties together all the things we have mentioned so far. So one time when I was young, I was with two women and my friend who was black. He ran into the other room. These two women started talking. They seemed to not realize like that as a kid you can hear and understand things. So they started talking, and one of them said that she felt bad for my friend who didn't have a father that went to church with them. And I butted in and I said, my father doesn't go to church. And she went and said, well, your father still has Christ in his heart. I want to emphasize, my father, not Christian. Never was, not really. He never would have classified as a Christian. So anyways, so that was bold. But then, too, the other woman said she feels bad because I bet you the father wasn't even in my friend's life at all. Like, she thinks that the father wasn't part of my friend's life at all. I was flabbergasted because my father, he was a construction worker. He got up really early in the morning. He was gone the whole time, like the whole day. He worked 12 hours a day. He worked 12-hour days. Some Saturdays, every weekday he was gone. And when he was home, he rested. That's just our family life. It is what it is. That's what he needed to do to make money for us. You know, obviously, I'm not upset about that in any way. But my friend had actively talked about how his father was part of his life and went to events with him and did all these things. But not my father. Like, that wasn't how it worked for us. And anyways, I was so flabbergasted, so I'm now not even butting in. I'm just like, what? Because now I was confused. I didn't understand why these women were saying this. And then the first woman was like, whoa, that's not shit. Like, that's not cool. Why would you think that his father wasn't in his life? And the second woman says something racist about black dads being, absent from the family. At that point, I completely block out anything else that was said, if at all, because my friend was coming right back. Like, he left really happy, and he's about to come back, so they didn't really have time to gossip. I was just flabbergasted by this conversation. So already I disagreed with person one, like woman one. I already disagreed with what she said. But person two was just wildly inappropriate. Like, there was no reason. The point is, my family was never shit-talked because of the color of their skin. My family's faith was never questioned. My father's role in the family was never questioned. The love within my family was never questioned. While my friends' families, all of those things were questioned. Solely because I'm white, so I had the privilege of not having that when my friend was black and didn't have that privilege. We grew up in very similar circumstances. Similar everything, bracket-wise, everything. So the difference was solely racial. And that right there is white privilege that I had. It is proof that I had white privilege. And my friend did not. So John says that he helps get children in low-income cities educations, however, only when it comes to Christian schools. John's friend, in this historically accurate retelling of the conversation, points out that that's not a great thing, but instead of explaining why it is a good thing, John says this, flabbergasted. I have to imagine that Rob must not have seen the state of public schools recently. So John's friend points out how the whiteness in these Christian schools can feed into white supremacy, but that's not really what I want to talk about right now. John can give his money to exclusively Christian schools, but he's not helping all the people in the poor areas. He's exclusively helping Christian families, which again is his right. But I have seen the state of public schools recently. They need more money, they need more supplies, they need better class sizes, teachers need raises, special needs classes need to be way better. I'm not saying individuals can't be religious, I'm just saying those can be taught in their community or at home. But it seems like John is actively saying Christianity should be taught in schools, not any other religion, of course. I do want to point out that here in the US, you can take off certain days of school because of religion, certain classes, etc. So they're not pushing any agenda, it's supposed to be neutral, right? It seems like John finds that neutrality is attacking Christianity, which it's not. Cooper re-asks his friend what he can do to help. I desire to help. I told you what my family is currently doing to give poor communities a quality Christian education. So what John is doing to help fight racism is give to exclusively Christian schools. I want to point out that white people hold the highest percent of Christianity here in the US. So what John is doing isn't necessarily helping black kids get an education. He's helping Christians get an education. He can feel free to give his money to Christian schools, but don't lie and say it's in the name of racial equality. This next quote is still about fighting racism, so keep that in mind. I want to tackle education. Encourage unmarried people to abstain from sex. Promote fatherhood and family. Teach virtues. And explain the ways of God that will bring blessing into our lives. Okay, I am sincerely frustrated. How is any of that about trying to fight for racial equality? It is purely about religion. If someone wants everyone to have an education, they would help provide unbiased and proper education to everyone. If someone was worried about people having kids out of wedlock, they would help give options for every individual person. For some, that is abstinence. For others, it is clinics that help provide birth control pills, IUDs, general sex education, condoms. And teaching morals is great. Compassion, understanding, those are things we should be teaching. But like I said, no one has the right to force a religion onto other people. Imagine this book, one for one, but instead of talking about Christianity, someone was pushing a different religion. Imagine how people like John would be reacting to that book. It would be very badly. Now imagine the backlash of people like John if other religious texts were getting pushed in the classroom like Christianity is. In 2024, Oklahoma State Superintendent of Public Instruction Ryan Walters issued an order that, effective immediately, all Oklahoma schools are required to incorporate the Bible, which include the Ten Commandments, as an instructional support into the curriculum for ages 5 through 12. Providing a physical copy of the Bible, the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Ten Commandments as resources in every classroom in the state district. Louisiana requires the posting of the Ten Commandments in public schools classrooms, including institutions of higher education. In 2023, Texas passed a law to change the reading list for K through 12th grade, and that list includes more than a dozen biblical texts. And then Cooper says, I don't know how to explain it. He questions how acknowledging systematic racism would help feed kids and help kids to read, and he says he wants to help teach ethics, responsibility, loyalty, love, honor, respect, and the golden rule. My question is, how is pushing Christianity helping any of that? Besides maybe arguably the golden rule, which is mentioned in the Bible, but it is also mentioned in a lot of other works. He says yet again that social justice warriors believe that there is a supernatural power unleashed when people vocalize these statements. And they believe that they are creating a brand new human, a superhuman. I'm going to legitimately need a break, because no one is saying that just by saying racism is real, suddenly everything's going to be better. What we're saying is by acknowledging that, we can help fight for a better tomorrow. Do you remember the end of last chapter when he said not everyone deserves potato salad at the 4th of July party? And I'm supposed to be wrong for saying everyone does deserve food. But here, he's saying he's the one trying to help kids fight hunger, but despite not actually saying how he's helping kids fight hunger. You know a great way to help kids fight hunger? Public schools giving out free food. But John, you are the one that's against public schools and giving out free food. This is just the opening part of the chapter, and I fear I'm not strong enough for this. So in the last chapter, I mentioned Cooper being strongly against Karl Marx. This is where he gets into that, kind of. Cooper says the concepts that Karl Marx helped build fueled dictators, murderers, and the average, embittered, vengeful person that lives next door and only understands life through the eyes of victimhood. What the hell is he talking about? He lumps together dictators, murderers, and also a random hypothetical neighbor. Is he really trying to say everyone who happens to view life similarly to Marx is equal to a murderer or dictator? Also, apparently Marx's ideas are religious and mystical. He goes on to also mention Hegel, which Cooper calls an intellectual rock star, but then says Hegel changed the game and set the stage for our modern day madness. I guess egg on my face for thinking Cooper was hyping Hegel up by calling him a rock star. It's because Cooper calls himself that. It's just a bit odd because up until now in the book, John makes it incredibly clear how he feels about the person by the descriptors he uses when introducing them. One piece of shit in the last chapter he called enlightened when the other person was woke or progressive, which Cooper uses as negative terms, at least in my opinion. The next thing is Cooper seems to be trying to take away Hegel's religion by saying Hegel's early life was spent amongst a tradition referred to as German pietism, and he claimed to be Lutheran, and later he calls him a self-proclaimed Lutheran. John seems to be allergic to saying Hegel was Lutheran, which is odd because it feels like John is trying to use Hegel's religion to belittle those atheist social justice warriors by saying they sound so religious because of Hegel. It's both Hegel isn't a real Christian, and also these woke shits that say they don't believe in God actually do because of Hegel and his religion. I just feel like John is trying to have his cake and eat it too with his argument. I didn't even mention it, but I'm pretty sure Marx liked Hegel's idea except for the religion, and he took that out. So even one step away, the focus on God was gone. Cooper explains Hegel's idea, which is here called the thesis, antithesis, synthesis model. But before we get into that, John gives another warning. This is actually his third warning, but the other one felt unnecessary to be honest. It's important to acknowledge that this is the most difficult chapter of the book. Some of you may be tempted to stop reading because you don't understand Hegel's mind-bending philosophies, but don't give up. It's not Hegel's ideas that make me want to quit, it's John's. But alas, I must finish my goal or die trying. I'm going to be completely honest, I didn't trust John to correctly tell me about Hegel's ideas, so I actually went and did my own research, but I quickly realized that that didn't matter because John's ideas of Hegel, I think, differentiate between other people's ideas or even Hegel's ideas directly, and also John is just jumping around. I kind of had no floor to stand on. You will see what I mean in a moment, but yeah, that was really unimportant. So if you don't know fully Hegel's ideas like me, don't worry about it. You know, I did my best. Just do your best. Trust me. I know eventually John gets to examples, but I really just need to point out just how long of, like, how many pages of just really trying to understand him. And he's just fumbling, kind of introducing this concept. Now, I want to make it very clear. I do not care about Hegel's actual arguments or his ideas. What I care about is arguing John. But I can't do that if I don't understand what John is trying to say. So John goes on to listing 5 thesis, antithesis examples, but he doesn't actually bring in the synthesizing of these examples. By the way, only one of these have a source that you could hypothetically click on. Let's focus on one of the examples he gives, which is actually under the list in a paragraph. However, it is more personal to me, and I also think that it's the simplest to break down, like, how everything isn't holding up. Children cannot get tattoos and can't smoke cigarettes, but they can change their gender and sex, and they can take hormone blockers that may cause irreversible damage to their bodies. So first of all, kids can get tattoos. First, I mean illegally, but that's not what I'm talking about, but I mean legally. Parents can actually sign consent for minors, for their kids, to get tattoos. Maybe not in all places, but definitely in some. This is also shown a lot more with piercings. I got my first piercing, my lobe piercings, when I was 7. A 7-year-old cannot go to a shop by themselves and get a piercing, but they can if they go with a parent and the parent signs saying that the parent gives consent for their kid to get a piercing. Kids can't get piercings, but technically they can because I did, and so many more do. Similar points can be made about drinking alcohol or smoking cigarettes. First of all, kids can get them illegally. But 2, I don't know about the laws about handing a kid a cigarette, but within the home, you're allowed to give your kid alcohol years before the kid could legally go out and buy it themselves. But now let's look at the antithesis to these theses. Changing your sex can really just be social transitioning. That's name, pronouns, clothes, a haircut. So none of those are really an antithesis to any of the theses that were given. But that leads us to hormone blockers, and I'm going to even just throw in HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy. For me, that's taking testosterone. Kids can say they want blockers or HRT, but the way that they get them is they need their parents to sign for consent. Also, blockers and HRT are already through the filter of a doctor. Are you really going to go to a dentist and say kids shouldn't get braces because they're minor, it can have negative side effects, and it will affect them for the rest of their life? I don't really see how these examples are supposed to be like opposite of each other, because they really fall under the same umbrella of minors needing their parents' consent or their guardians' consent to do these things. But maybe I'm just jumping too far ahead, because again, he doesn't bring in the synthesis yet, which actually he never even comes back to this to even try to apply a synthesis to, which personally I find very annoying. But that's just me. I don't know why we're bringing up arguments and these examples and this particular model of thinking if you don't actually follow through with it. Now for sure I'm jumping too far ahead, so let's continue. I have written and crossed out so much in this section because I don't know what I should say, like what should make it into the video or not. John also mentions the largest ever decline in math scores since they began tracking them. Again, I can't see the source that he actually links, but he says that he got it from the 2023 NAEP report, which does show a downward motion, but there was a really big tick in 2020, and I just can't help but wonder if something, I don't know, globally happened, something that maybe could have affected kids and going to school and their learning, but who knows? I'm just kidding. But that being said, I do want to point out that the motion downwards did start before then. However, even with the really sharp downward tick at 2020, the scores are still higher than when they started keeping record back in like the 70s. Obviously, I think the school should be better for all kids, but none of this ties back to the thesis-antithesis argument. John just says that people say math is racist, and then all this other stuff just floods out. Also, I personally never even heard the math is racist argument. I'm also not going to look it up. I'm not looking up math is racist. Like, I never heard about it, so I'm not, that's not the point. Like, I'm not looking that up. Hopefully this brief explanation is enough to make clear the relevance of Hegel for the 2020s. No, it isn't. Maybe it's just because I'm kind of tired and that's why I'm so confused, but it really seems like just a way of saying one thing and then a bullshit side thing, but those things don't relate to anything. He just wants to use this, thought model as a way to complain about things he dislikes. So all of this ties back to John saying God and the Bible are the only way. And Hegel's teaching is trying to lead us to a futuristic utopia, which obviously John thinks is a super bad thing. Again, I'm not talking about Hegel or his ideas. That's just what John is doing, and I want to explain where I disagree with. So this all for a few pages is just Christian infighting, so I'm just going to skip ahead to later. The modern woke seem rather like religious fanatics that can't be reasoned with. And this explains why their ideas are so unreasonable and illogical. They're like superstitious zealots who don't need to reason because they have faith. Am I misreading that, or does that second sentence not make sense? Like, I think I would have said they don't need to be reasonable, or they don't need to follow reason, or literally just who don't need reason. But that's just me. But also, may I add, what the actual fuck? John is a deeply religious man who is now saying people that base their worldview on religion is unreasonable and illogical. This is the same man who repeatedly says in this very book that the answer to everything is in the Bible. This is the man that says if you have faith in God, that everything will work out. I'm especially calling back when he's talking about money. This is incredibly hypocritical that I had to reread this section multiple times because I just could not believe this. Because I just could not believe that's what he was saying. And then Cooper says, it is not without irony that the God-hating atheist Karl Marx held extremely mystical and religious beliefs that formed the foundation of his philosophy of revolution, beliefs that were inspired by Hegel. So yes, Cooper has just went over how Hegel ties his ideas to God/Christianity. However, he shows no evidence that Karl Marx also did that. Mainly, I believe Karl Marx liked how Hegel unfolded ideas, but not the religious aspects of it. I think I mentioned that earlier, but John is just jumping to the conclusion that because Hegel equaled religion, Marx equaled religion, therefore the atheist woke left equals religion, which is just incorrect. So Cooper continues talking about different offshoots of Christianity and alchemy. So again, I'm going to skip over all that. The overarching idea is basically summed up as all things are interconnected, all things are one, which John disagrees with. So now John is talking about the two men that Hegel got his ideas from, like built his ideas from, and I can't overstate this. This is also John can disagree with Karl Marx, but he has not yet quoted Karl Marx, he has not yet brought up Karl Marx's actual ideas. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love to deep dive into conversations. I mean, I made 3 videos on 3 chapters of this book, but none of this is relative to the topic at hand, which is Karl Marx and his ties to the modern day left. I feel like we're losing the plot. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. An idea and its opposite are presented. And rather than choosing which is true or false, the two are combined. In alchemy, the goal is not to destroy one or both of the elements. Instead, the elements are dissolved into each other. I just don't understand how we're still explaining. I don't understand how we're still explaining the idea of a true fact and its opposite. We are not even bringing in to the equation, trying to synthesize it. We are still bringing up the idea of synthesizing things. Then Cooper continues to talk about Hegel and God. Again, don't get me wrong, if you want to talk about how others view God, that's neato. But that's not how this started. I personally don't think this is all necessary to explaining the idea of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Maybe I'm just the one that's not getting it. Maybe I'm the fool in this situation. Finally, we get to the idea of synthesis. However, instead of going back to the previous arguments and trying to synthesize them, he lists new arguments, and then still doesn't try to connect them at all. I just got up to take a break, and I came back and read this. Thesis, the overturning of Roe, which enshrined the right to abortion in federal law, is an attack on women. Antithesis, there is no such thing as a woman, and men can get pregnant. I have never had my frustration jump up that high that quickly. Yes, the overturning of Roe v. Wade is and was inherently misogynistic and strips women of the right to control their bodies. Yes, men can get pregnant. Trans men. Also non-binary people. The overturning of Roe v. Wade also strips them of their right to control their bodies. I also don't see how in that antithesis he is lumping together there's no such thing as a woman, and also men, talking about trans men here, do exist. Obviously, I know trans men exist. I also know women exist. The synthesis is that yes, both points blend together to show reality. Yes, the overturning of Roe v. Wade is an attack on women. It is also an attack on people like non-binary people and men, whom can get pregnant. Yes. Yes, these blend together. And John is saying they don't. Oh my god. Now, I'm trying to reel in my comments, so I don't want to break down every single one of his examples, but if you would let me just break down one more real quick. Thesis. Majority white churches show their racism by not having black church leaders. I just spilled water all over my keyboard. Antithesis. Majority white churches show their racism by having black leaders. This is referred to as tokenism. The idea is that some churches choose to have black leaders as a sign or token of their inclusive bona fides. So starting with the thesis, I have never said my church, which was primarily white, was racist for not having black leaders. I said, and will continue to say, that they were racist because they held prejudice against, they were harmful, and they were hateful to people that were non-white. However, yes, if a church refuses to place black individuals in leadership positions, I would call them racist. Now to the antithesis. Show me a white church that does this. Because I know someone who looked through a ton of churches recently because they were trying to find one that they liked, and they could not name one white church that did this. They could find churches that have black leaders, but the congregation were mixed, not primarily white. I don't know, maybe this is happening somewhere and I just didn't see it. But I guess even then, it's how they react. I just sowed us a whole bunch of water. I guess this could be happening somewhere and I just didn't see it. And then I guess it goes down to how people are handling it. Because if they're being normal about it, then it's great that there's a black leader in church. Like, yeah, okay, great. But if they're being weird about it and is tokenism, then yes, that is racism. And again, Cooper has yet to actually try to apply synthesis to any of these arguments. He's failing the thing he brought up himself. I personally think it is because he couldn't find an actual argument that has no nuance whatsoever. I mean, at the very beginning of this book right here, he says, quote, "The sky is blue," as this like matter-of-fact, unchanging fact. But in John Cooper's way of thinking, you can have the thesis of the sky is blue and the antithesis of the sky is not always blue, the sky is orange, and then the synthesis of saying that the sky has a varying amount of colors depending on situations. So everything has a nuance. However, it's not always time and place to actually talk about them. So at the beginning of the book, when he says the sky is blue, I didn't go, actually, hold on a second, because I knew what he meant. That being said, you can't just turn away and say nuances don't exist at all just because you don't like them. This next one is transphobic, by the way, but I cut out the first part, but just know this is supposed to be based in transphobia. Someone can look at the physical features and genitalia of a male and say with certainty that he is male. The second way to come to this conclusion would be to recognize that the man does not have female genitalia. This is the classic thesis-antithesis model. No, the fuck it isn't. How can somebody write about an idea for so long, but then somehow be so far from the reality of what it is? I really don't have the words here. The opposite would be that that individual would have female genitalia. Thesis, this person has male genitalia. Antithesis, this person has female genitalia. Those would be the opposite. Again, bullshit. Those would be the opposite. But what he is saying it is not that. I'm literally working myself up again. Then my favorite line. It is hard to imagine that gender theory would exist had Hegel not created his dialect. Damn, I guess all those people that have written about their feelings that could nowadays be classified as gender dysphoria all just cease to exist. All the people that use the words that were available to them in their time and in their culture before 1770, which is when Hegel was born, just never happened. Never happened. Noops, no, done. Then it gets even wilder. The proponents of gender theory believe that eventually there will be no boundaries, no separation, absolutely no distinction between men and women. As the gender binary is destroyed, this will bring oneness to society, because once gender binary distinctions disappear, then all division in society can disappear. Thus, the end of gender will be the end of human suffering. I just wanted gender roles and stereotypes to be thrown away, but if you're telling me that they, theming everyone using the wrong pronouns for most people would end all of human suffering, I'm willing to do that. I just didn't get the update. I didn't get that newsletter. Cooper then says Hegel says, since all things in the universe are in motion, every stage of development is part of the truth. He disagrees by saying, if I swallow a seed and then claim that I swallowed a tree, people would rightfully recognize this as an untruth. So if murder is a person killing a person, and an embryo is not a person just because it's what it develops to become, does that mean abortion is not murder then? This is something that we are told consistently in the 2020s. We must do the work. It is often said in social justice work regarding racial justice. Okay, so earlier when John said the left just wants to use magic words to stop racial injustice, he knew he was lying, because here he's saying you have to put work into it. God himself is coming to completion. What is this, AO3? Sorry. Sorry, that was... To conceive of God. Didn't Mary already do that in the Bible? This is why arguing with the woke is so unfruitful. They are not looking to rectify their inconsistencies. They wish to embrace them. They believe as a matter of faith that the end result is perfection. No. As the ambassador of the left. Right here, right now. What I can safely say is that we are trying to work for a more fair system. Perfection is ideal, but is not possible. One should aim for perfection, but expect it to not be flawless. We should continue to hope and work towards it to be as perfect as possible, as humanly possible. At the end of the sample that I'm reading, John is talking about mystical thinking and stuff, and all I can think about is how within even just John's life, we as humans have made strive that people in the 1700s could have never thought possible. from Hegel's time to now is just such different worlds. So John just keeps kind of talking in a spiral about God and Hegel's more infighting kind of situation. So nothing is related to like the woke or to me, so I'm just gonna skip and say like this is the end of the chapter. He does say that this all is like important once he talks about Marx, which he never actually seems to get to, but maybe later on in the book it all is connected and everything John says suddenly makes sense. Again, I don't know, I didn't read it. Okay, so that was the prologue, chapter 1 and 2 of John Cooper's book, Wimpy, Weak, and Woke. I'm not gonna lie, I've had a low-grade migraine for like the last couple days, so I really hope I didn't like misread this whole chapter and John was like 100% in the right, and now I just look like a fool. But I highly doubt that because I did read this like originally and then when I wrote the notes for it. So I did read this twice and like not understand it either times. And maybe because of the migraine, that's why this chapter feels even more batshit than the other ones. It feels like he is spiraling and I'm spiraling because he's spiraling, but like we're spiraling in two different places. Thank God. It feels wild. Like this chapter, it starts out like normal and then it just dissolves into just a mess. The other chapters were more research and like arguing points, when this one was like Cooper trying to understand an idea but not getting it, but also at the same time trying to teach other people about this idea, but again, still not getting it. So I didn't really know how to like disprove him because again, he himself wasn't making sense, you know? But I had to talk about it because he just said the most absolutely wild, absurd things in this chapter. Out of nowhere. Again, no links, no reasoning, no facts. It just the most random stuff you could think of. I mean, I guess that's it. I guess like I'm free to go live my life again because like I'm done. That was it. That's the whole the whole free sample. So I'm done. I am no longer shackled to this book. What will I do first? I'm gonna eat. I'm not gonna lie. I know exactly what I'm gonna do. This took me fucking so long to record because so much of it didn't make sense. I had to keep going back and being like, what's this? And then I spilled water all over my keyboard. So I'm done. I'm going to clean up the rest of the water because I found more water under my keyboard. But I'm done. Good night. Goodbye.